Hi.
Oh, we're good with introducing ourselves.
Oh, you want to, okay. Sounds good to me. Let's work. I didn't. Instead of both of it's just on system borrowers. And on system great. Good, that's another good one. That was actually the Canadian side. Good for that.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cohen. I'm the head of Discovery and User Experience at Indiana University Bloomington. I'm going to turn over to Sherry.
Hi, I'm Sherry Michaels. I am the Director of Collection Strategies and Management at Indiana University Bloomington. And we're here today to talk about the Big Collection, which is a Big Ten Academic Alliance initiative that Rachel and I have both been involved in now for a little while in various ways. So today we're going to talk about what is the Big Collection, and then really the most interesting to most ILL folks is the resource sharing policy harmonization report. So Rachel's going to talk about that. There's also some ongoing shared collections work for a committee that I'm chairing. So we'll talk a little bit about that and then go into the implications of both of those policies and some next steps. So what is the Big Collection? The Big Ten Academic Alliance is a network of now 19 libraries. Whether they'll ever change their name, I'm not sure, but it is a commitment on behalf of those library directors to treat all of our collections as a singular, shared, fully networked collection. And so they made that commitment a couple of years ago, and they have been working in the meantime on creating a lot of working groups, a lot of infrastructure, and trying to figure out how to make this vision a reality. And so what will the Big Collection look like? This was before the 4 new schools joined the Big Ten this past August. If you combined all of our collections of the 15 schools, that would give us the 3rd largest library collection in the world. We have since added the University of Southern California, UCLA, University of Washington, and the University of Oregon to the Big Ten. So we're probably getting much closer to the British Library numbers at this point as well. So we're talking some very significant numbers of collections amongst our universities. And so the whole purpose of trying to create, what we're essentially trying to create is a knowledge commons and around the whole libraries. But we want to continually improve the value at scale. We want to increase the findability and usability of the total pool of content across the Big Ten. And we want to increase resilience to an uncertain future of our university. So by working collaboratively and working together, we can try to insulate against some of the downturns in, the enrollment drop off and things like that. But then we also want to deepen our independence and figure out how we can work inclusively and collaboratively together. So that's really some of the goals. So as you can imagine, trying to get all of these very disparate universities who share none of the same systems in any area except for interlibrary loan. All of the 15 schools used Iliad. That was the one system shared amongst all schools. But now that we've added 4 new schools, they don't all use Iliad. So we are now, no system is across everyone. And so they first, to get to the first mile marker, it was basically to try to get any content from anywhere to anyone. That's mile marker 1 of the vision. And so they decided they needed to work in 5 areas of focus. So there's collective action, open publishing, diversity, equity, inclusion, systems of trust for the print collections, and then also some digital collections. What we're going to talk about today is around the print collections. And so we want to try to figure out how we're going to unite these. But all of these areas do need some sort of infrastructure, both technological, service-based, social, cultural. We're trying to create these groups and working groups and trying to figure out, well, how are we going to get these things to work together? So today's focus, as I said, is we're going to mostly focus on the print collections. And there are very many different committees working on various aspects of the big collection. But today we're going to focus primarily on the 2 that Rachel and I have been the most involved in and related as they're most relevant to the ILL activities.
All right, so the first section we're going to talk about is the harmonization of resource access policies. Now, this was a committee put together about 2 years ago. I should have given you membership. I didn't think of that. And our job was to recommend harmonization across access policies for ILO. Which, as you can imagine, was going to be an interesting task. We all have very different ideas of what should be shared, how it should be shared, when it should be shared, etc. But the group went in with an overarching vision to realize the Big Ten Academic Alliance united vision of seamless collection access, complemented by a unified, consistent user experience. We need to ensure the lending and access policies are in alignment across the consortium. That means aligning these policies may require libraries to rethink how they manage access for their users, not just their lending policies. So this was going to both be how are we lending to each other, but also how are we lending to our own patrons. So some of the overarching principles that we thought about is we need to plan to treat each other's patrons as our own, which is this shift in thinking. But that also may require us to rethink how our local policies are for our own patrons. If we're suddenly going to let everybody, Iowa have our any items for 17 weeks, and we don't let our own users have any of our items for 17 weeks, that's not equitable access. And so we need to really think about what do we allow our ILL partners to have, what do we allow our own users to have, and figure out how we're going to unify and policy harmonize across the board. We need to strive for aspirational goals. We need to think about what kind of resource sharing environment we currently have, and then where do we want to go from there? What aren't we doing now? What do we wish we could be doing that we may not have the technology for? The difficult conversations we haven't had yet. What aren't we sharing just because we just have never shared? Where do we want to go? We want to really just think beyond just what we are doing now. Sharing should be the default. It should be assumed that if you own it, you should share it. And we want to align with the DEI principles. All of this should be aligned to increase DEI. So more people can access it. That means people don't have to travel to your universities to get it, which allows more access. More materials are available, which means hidden collections or collections that aren't often shared are available. All of that should be taken into account. But one thing we did want to note, we understand that every institution's implementation and progress will be different, and that is okay. We are not asking everybody to implement this from day one, because there are going to be difficult conversations we're going to have at our own institutions, and each institution has to have those difficult conversations in the way that works best for them. So we're all saying these principles, but we also want to give you the note. We understand that this isn't going to be an immediate day one thing. Overarching understanding. We are trusted partners who, whenever possible, will actively share from all of our general physical collections, regardless of format. That should just be our general understanding with each other. These changes will require a strong commitment toward action from our library's administration. This needs to come from the top all the way to the bottom. This just can't come from our ILL partners. We need a commitment from this across the board, and administration really needs to spearhead it. And then we understand that each institution is unique, and our goal is to honor that uniqueness. We are not asking people to give up some of their uniqueness. If there are things that just really can't circulate, that's okay. We had somebody be like, well, I really can't circulate the cheese book because it has to stay in the refrigerator. And we were like, we understand, and that's one of your unique collections. There are going to be unique things like that. We honor that. That can be outside the sharing agreement. We're not asking you to figure out how to ship the cheese book. But that was a conversation we had as a group. Yeah.
That's something we can Google.
Is it made of cheese or without?
No, it's made of cheese.
Okay, just wanted to check.
So many questions.
Yeah.
I think it's at Iowa, if I remember the location correctly.
Well, sounds like it should be at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where I'll just give you guys a quick background. I'm not in ILL. I was there for the user experience part. And I had a lot of questions through all of this of like, what do you mean? So the cheese one just stuck in my brain of like, why do we have a cheese book? And is it cataloged? And can I find the catalog record? So we also identified some barriers to sharing. Local ILL policies will all need to align. That means a lot of people are gonna have to rewrite their policies. A lot of people are gonna rewrite their documentation. Glad we all had Garrett to talk about how to do documentation before that. Again, local library and collection policies and procedures will need to change. Circulation wise, we're gonna have to figure out, there's just a lot of work to make this happen. And then one thing to note, though, I think this was, again, while we still all were on ILLiad, I'm not sure how this is gonna work now that we're not on ILLiad, is that our systems need to make this all possible. For example, ILLiad does not make it easy to renew more than one item at a time. And so that was something we identified is some of the technology we use doesn't always make it easy to do some of the things we're asking it to do. So we need to work with those companies to get them to do the things we need it to do. And then for some of the aspirational things, I don't know, ILLing streaming of videos, streaming media, data sets. Some of the technology isn't there yet. So we need to figure out how to get the technology there for some of that aspiration. So what came out is a new version of the Big Ten Academic Alliance Resource Sharing Agreement. So I will just preface, there has been one of these for quite a while. We just rewrote it quite a bit. So with this new agreement, we agreed to share everything this up from here up. Oh, go back.
You swipe the screen. Go the other way. Not working the way it did in my room. There,
Oh, there we go. Okay. Good to know.
don't touch it.
No, no touching. And then the aspirational stuff is here down. So, to me, I thought physical collections wasn't actually going to be like controversial. That was really stupid of me when I was one of the people who put this chart together and then I presented it to them. I did not know the firestorm I put together when I made this. Because things like maps, I didn't know what I was putting that in there. We eventually agreed to it, but like people were like, but how are we gonna ship maps? Some of them are really fragile. And I was like, I don't know, poster tubes like that. So also special collections, that was asking a lot. Digitizations seem to be totally fine. MP3, CD-ROMs, PDF. I think I had some pushback on. But we got there. And then electronic collections. We aspire to eventually, once we have the technology, share streaming media, data sets, and then ebooks through a standardized sharing mechanism. So sharing special collections, I called that out. The goal is to share special collections whenever possible. There are just some special collections we're never going to share. I'm pretty sure we're never going to convince the Lillard Library to send anything out. Several other schools have other very rare book special collections. But there may be archival collections or things in our folklore collection that is categorized as special, but may not need to be special. That we just need to look at, again, to see if everything that's categorized as special really should be special. I will note the Big Ten Academic Alliance principles and protocols for interlibrary loan of special collections govern the borrowing and lending of digitization of special collections. So that's a different policy. So we just refer to another policy for special collections. The goal is to get there one day. I don't think we'll ever get there fully, but we're pushing that way. Scores, I will also say, was another one that I was shocked by the number of pushbacks there. From a UX person, I was like, but why can't they use them? E-resources. So we also acknowledged that e-resources are limited by licensing agreements. And we are going to have to do a lot of work with the licensing agreements from the start to get ILL in there, which may mean e-resources people need to do that. Actually, that's not an ILL thing. You guys don't have to do that. That should really be an ILL and collections thing to start with. And so we need to work with other groups to make that happen. And then again, we're waiting for both licensing and technology for other resources. In general, what does the agreement say? 2 days business response with caveats. Caveat is if it's off-site or off-campus, it may require longer turnaround. No request limit. We did talk about, does that mean someone requests 500 volumes of something and would we send it? The answer is technically yes, though someone was like, we would just have a conversation with each other. But technically, someone could request 500 volumes of something and it would be sent. That goes along with the request limit. There is no piece limit. 17-week loan is the new standard, with 2 renewals. So, that's a long time.
Are the renewals each 17 weeks?
Yes. So often we tell our users to go to the BTA, because they actually have currently better loan periods with them than anything else we offer some of our users. No recalls, unless it's needed for course reserves or no other circulating copies. So, we will just request the copy from somebody else. We would prefer to do that than recall an item. I wasn't sure what else you guys would be interested in, so I just threw the entire thing on here. Insurable, 330-pound box limit, scanning an entire work in the public domain, no charge for lost. Yeah. You guys all, that was controversial too.
Yeah, well, if we won't be paying for a replacement copy of someone else.
Yeah, we don't charge each other for lost items. So,
So I have a quick question. What was the rationale behind that? Because I mean, I have thoughts about like even like overdue fees or like lost damage fees. I don't agree with them. But that is very controversial. So what was like the general reasoning for that?
we don't charge each other for fees, my understanding. Yeah.
So we don't charge each other any fees at all. We used to have a lost fee if it was like lost. And ultimately they decided that most of the time the book does get returned. And we spend so much staff time in the billing and the tracking of the bill and then eventually it does. We do still have all agreed to bill our own patron. So if it is long overdue, we will bill our own patron. And that usually prompts the return.
Yeah.
But we don't share any of that with each other. And the thinking of not charging each other is that you lose about the same number of books that we lose. And therefore we're just not going to deal with the billing end of things.
I should have put no fees on here. Sorry. Rush cataloging and process times, if something is requested that's in the rush catalog, in cataloging status. I think 2 years ago that wasn't controversial. I think now is more and more of our tech services are kind of more and more, I will just say decimated. That may be more controversial. But 2 years ago when this agreement was written, no one had pushed back on that. And then we agreed to keep analytics for 4 years rolling. So after 4 years, you can drop the 5th year. I believe these are also ILLiad analytics. So again, I don't know what we're going to do with the schools now that don't have ILLiad analytics.
Just before we move on, I will say that if you Google Big Ten Academic Alliance Policy Harmonization Report, it's the first thing that comes up and it has all the details of the whole report. So you can take a look at it. So another committee in which I am chairing is around the shared print collection. So the shared print collection is essentially very similar to a lot of ILL folks know what shared print is, but not everyone does. So in general, it is having a collection that is shared amongst a group of libraries. And we are working towards not only having a shared collection, but having a collection that is collectively managed. And so that is the primary difference. And so we have a shared print repository now with the Big Ten, and that was journals. And so a lot of, and Ally had a last shared print project as well. And so the shared print project that we had with the Big Ten was to retain journals that most of us held electronically, so Elsevier, Wiley, Springer. But we would keep the print copy of a journal just so that we retained a copy of the print. And then those were housed, they actually chose to co-locate those collections. And so those are actually housed at Indiana University and the University of Illinois. So IU, we hold about 290,000 volumes on behalf of the Big Ten of Wiley, Springer, Elsevier titles. And then those are under our care, but we don't always own them. So other schools sent us their copies, but we're holding them on behalf of the Big Ten so that everyone has a backup print copy. And then a lot of libraries chose to withdraw their copy of those titles because we had a copy, and as you know, big space hogs. And so if you're looking to retain some space, that is one thing that people were really keenly interested in. So what we were trying to do is build on that model that we already had. And so what we are proposing as the next step in moving towards a shared collection is that we are going to take both our shared print repositories at Indiana, sorry, I touched it, in Illinois, and then we're going to add in a distributed repository, so of monographs. So monographs will be held at each institution, but they will be contributed to the shared collection. And then all of that will be put in together into a truly shared collection where it is actually jointly managed. There will be a group that determines what happens with those materials, which of those materials are going to get digitized, which ones will be retained. And so there will be a truly collectively managed shared collection. And that is the group that I am currently chairing right now. So one of the things that we looked at in trying to figure out what should be retained, OCLC did a lovely report for us several years ago, which is where the whole idea of the big collection came from. And then they did some initial analysis. And then we, at the Big Ten, got a product called Gold Rush. And they put a bunch of records in there and did some analysis and looked at the number of items that overlap. And you'll see that almost 2% are owned by 3 or fewer of the 15 institutions when they ran this analysis. So 60%, fully 60% of our collections are only held at one of the 15 institutions. And so that's a huge amount of uniqueness. When you scope that out and look across the whole WorldCat holdings, it's not quite as unique. And so we want to be good partners in the shared print collection universe. But in order for us to have access within the Big Ten to these materials, these 3 are where we're looking towards trying to retain those at least. And then when we get up to these where 0.1% of the collection is held by all 15 schools, not everyone needs to keep their copy. Some people could withdraw and all of that. But we're not talking about that for right now. What we're really looking at is trying to secure this 80% of our collection where there are 3 or fewer copies. And so we want to try to retain those first. So what our group did was we took a life cycle of the collections approach in our report. And so there's a whole lot of thing that goes into making a big shared collection. And that includes things like buying it up front and determining how many copies do we need to purchase. So the whole acquisitions end of things, that is solidly outside of the purview of our committee. That's a big one. And so what we really started with was the selection of things that were already purchased and that will be retained. And then we talked about some circulation and access. Well, is this going to be a dark archive? Is it going to be a dark repository, or will things circulate? And what are the rules that are going to govern this shared collection? And trying to balance the access versus the preservation, because access really is a primary concern with our thinking, and especially when you have 60% that is only held at one institution. We want everyone to be able to have access to that material. So access it was a primary consideration. And so in order for it to be in the shared collection, it does need to circulate. Then we did talk a lot about description and metadata. There's still a lot of unknowns there, whether or not there'll be a 583 note, or whether or not we'll have a separate system where we record these and have like a commitments engine as some sort of technology. That one I'd say is the fuzziest of all of our recommendations so far. We're still working through this. And then there's some preservation and digitization considerations. Like I said, trying to balance the access and the preservation, and then what to do to replace or withdraw the materials. So just a few highlights from our report. What we are recommending is a shared print repository that for monographs that is distributed with an indefinite retention commitment. This is not a project. This isn't phase 3 of the shared print repository. This is a essentially permanent commitment to retain these materials on behalf of Big Ten. We are trying to attempt to balance access and preservation, so it is not a dark archive. And we want to, because it does circulate, it's going to circulate under those rules that Rachel was just talking about under the ILL policy harmonization report. So they will go for 17 weeks with multiple renewals. We will not charge. If it's lost, we aren't getting any money for it. So trying to figure out how does that fit into with the idea of a repository, and somebody trying to make commitments and think about the long-term preservation of their collection if something does get lost. So we are asking people at least make the attempt to replace it or find another copy that someone else can retain. So there are some things there around retention. It does have to have at least a minimal level of cataloging and bibliographic data in order for us to match records and to be able to determine what it is that we are keeping. And then we're going to share the commitment of records in some way, shape, or form. And then the items do need to be maintained in a loanable condition because access was a primary consideration. And some basic storage. We talked a lot about whether to only go with high density storage, which many of the Big Ten have, or just regular environmental controls of some sort. So the way that we wrote our report, there were minimal levels, preferred levels, and aspirational levels. The minimal is that it has to be in some sort of temperature controlled with a fire suppression system. The aspirational, high density storage. And then whether you and also have some level of ability to digitize to help prolong, so you don't have to loan it, but you can scan parts of it, things like that. And then you should make the attempt. So some of the implications from both of these policies, I just want to take a few minutes. Rachel alluded to them, but especially the ILL policy, when we look at the policy, it says 17-week loan plus renewals. That is better service than we give our own patrons at the moment. Faculty, yes, but undergrads, no. Usually the undergrads don't get that long. And depending on what collection it's in, the IU core collection, for example, that only goes for 2 weeks. But when we're loaning it out to UW-Madison, they get it for 17. And so we're really starting to think about our own policies in light of thinking more about our collections holistically amongst the Big Ten. We really need to be considering, well, what do we circulate? There are some things that we won't circulate to our own users that we now will circulate to the Big Ten. So we're really having conversations around, well, do we need to limit the way that we have been limiting in the past? First of all, no one uses print. If your staff look anything like ours, they've been going down the toilet for 20 years. And so do we really need to be thinking about not loaning print to anyone? If somebody wants it, we should probably be able to just send it. And so we're really having those kind of conversations around, well, what, especially if it's print, can we just loan it to everybody for a longer time? And that way we won't have this inequitable service right now where, other users are getting better service than our own. Also kind of thinking about what circulates. We're not being so precious about not circulating, videos or some of those other formats. So we really want to think about that more holistically. I know Rachel said that the policy was 2-day turnaround, but we actually shoot for 1. And so that has some staffing implications, and, we have some things in the building that are easy to do in 1 day, but if it's in offsite storage. And so what the ILL group has done is they've created 3 different tiers of materials. So tier 1 materials, we agree to fill within 1 day. And that goes into the next slide about some automation that we've set up with OCLC. We have tier 2 materials that will take a little bit longer. And then tier 3 materials are like, we really generally aren't going to send that, but if we're the only holder, come back to us, kind of thing, because we'll really need to talk. And that's really where all our special collections go, or some of the materials we're not done talking about yet in terms of special formats. There's also some scanning standards in that report, and so we need to be making sure that we are meeting those scanning standards. That also takes more staff time. And we had to make some changes actually on the scanners to up the DPI. We're only doing 1 page per scan, no more double pages, and trying to de-skew and block out any black spots. It just takes a little bit more futzing time to do all of those things in order to meet, and then also OCR and all of those things. So we want to, it does take a little bit more, but that is now an expected requirement of participating in this group. And then in terms of the shared collections, it's really starting to think about our own collection development and long-term retention and commitments. So what does IU need to be the one responsible to keep forever? And if it's owned somewhere else, do we really need to spend the time to keep this particular material? Why do I have to go on to lose space and hold on to it forever when 3 other schools own it? And so I already make those types of decisions on things that haven't been cataloged. So if I get a gift or somebody finds something on the shelf that didn't have a record, I look like, well, do I need to keep it? Is it held in the Big Ten? And if it is, then I'm not sure I would take our resources to catalog it and keep it when we have access through other means. So it really also does have implications for the long-term retention of our collections. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the next steps for each committee. So the ILL Policy Harmonization Committee doesn't do anything, but the ILL directors amongst the Big Ten, we still meet monthly. And so there's a few committee work, a few subcommittees that they are working on, mostly in relation to working with OCLC on a couple of technology upgrades. So one, we've been working with them for a year and a half, 2 years, on resource sharing for groups. And that is a project to do some automation amongst a group of libraries. And so we're piloting some work for them that they will then use for other groups. So it's not just going to be the Big Ten on that one, but we've been working with them and trying to work out how all of that will work. This is to replace a system that we had in the Big Ten called Uboro, and where you could place the request and see if it was in. And so we're trying to, this will replace the back end of it, not the discovery layer, but the back end of the routing, and trying to do some load leveling around amongst the libraries and things like that. The Chasing the Sun was a recent group that basically looked at the timing of requests. And so if it looks like, it could send a request to the West Coast folks because they're still open as opposed to the East Coast folks who have closed for the day, depending on when a request come in. So that's all would be automated and through the system looking at it, which just automatically routes some things. And so they just talked about that and some of the rules that would be the load optimization. I talked about trying to even the workflow, or if somebody is really short staffed, we could try to avoid them, or you can set some stuff and say, oh, not us for a little while, things like that. The dynamic groups, what was that, Garrett? It was, it changed like the custom holdings, and it will automatically change some things based on
that.
Yeah.
So the hope is that you want to keep it with custom holdings because it's a chore.
Yes.
So basically automating that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So using systems and AI to try to help do the dynamic thing. And then there's also just got an OCR pilot group. Are you on that? And so that is looking at accessibility issues and at which end of the spectrum do we do the OCRing? Is it at the borrowing side or the lending side? The borrowing side works much better if you can do it. But if they didn't do it and you receive an article, how can we, and what tools?
It would actually be an automated OCR for any request through. So it would almost, you'd submit something, it'd go through OCR and then get to you.
Yeah. So that's another pilot group that the Big Ten just charged last week. In terms of the shared collections working group, that one is just still, first draft went out and we got some feedback, but we're still waiting to get some more. And then so we have to get an approval on the initial report from the library deans. But then the next steps would be to come up with some procedures that goes with those policies. And that's where it's really going to get into more of the, if we had a 583 note, what does it, what's subfield A say, what does subfield B say, things like that. And then identifying those commitments. Is it the 1 item, 2 item, 3 item? And are we going to focus on any particular subject area or schools or things in high density storage or things that have already been digitized by HathiTrust? And so there is already a digital copy and things like that. And then identifying a group that will actually be the collective management of that shared collection and what decisions are they empowered to make about the collection as a whole, because that will be distributed amongst all schools. So that would be the next steps in both of those groups. That is all we had. Are there any questions?
So I know in the beginning, one of the standards that you all mentioned was, like implementation of DEI. So I was wondering what that looked like for this group. So is it like in collection development, hiring processes, professional development, cataloging? Because that can mean a lot of different things. So I was wondering if like it was kind of everything or there's a specific.
Sure. Yeah, on those 5 areas of focus, one of them was DEI. We are most related to collections and accessibility. So there is a lot happening on the accessibility end of being able to access services and collections is where I think the primary focus. I think a lot of us have internal groups and think about hiring and other things, but we haven't talked about it amongst the Big Ten as a group there. But we have talked a lot about accessibility of services and accessibility of the collections. Yeah, and so what we've done, so the accessibility group that you're on has, looked at, I've done a couple different things, like done audits of different providers of content, and we've done some testing on there, and then also some of the web pages, and then of course the new ADA rule that about accessibility. Rachel has been like up to her eyeballs in trying to get our own web pages to be accessible, and of course the group at the Big Ten talks about that as well. I don't know what else you have worked on in that area.
Yeah, it's really currently everybody's figuring out accessibility and figuring out what we're going to do with all of our repositories, digital collections, images, all of that, how we're going to figure out how to make those accessible, so that we can retain the access and people can still access those rare materials or those diverse materials, while still meeting the standards of the new ADA Title II, coming out, that's required by 2026. So,
Yeah, and on the collections end, we have talked a lot about, so a lot of people tend to weed low-use materials, but a lot of low-use materials tend to be by people of marginalized communities. And so making a concerted effort to not weed those materials, even if they haven't been used at our own institution, we feel it's important to keep those, so that they are there for future generations. And so making sure that we have explicitly said, we want you to keep those types of materials, so that they don't get further silenced to history by having it thrown away. And so it's been those types of conversations as well. Yes.
I was curious about how you move material between schools. Do you have any sort of carrier agreements, or is it just whatever method each school prefers to send things?
Is it FedEx or UPS?
It's UPS or no?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. We used to have a courier. I'm gonna show my age. I used to work at UW-Madison before I worked at IU, and I worked in ILL there. So, that, going back to the mid-90s, we had tubs. Because I know at UW-Madison, the red tubs were for the statewide system, and then the gray tubs were for the CIC at the time. And then it's not the CIC anymore, Big Ten. But they used to have it. And then at some point, they decided UPS was actually cheaper. And that's when they switched, I want to say early 2000s. So we haven't had our own courier for quite some time within the Big Ten.
But then if you've got, like, it's Purdue and IU are both in it, right?
Mhm.
So if you're moving things within Indiana, do you still just use Info Express, or are you sending it USPS?
So right now we're using UPS because of the Info Express issues, but we are using Info Express to return items.
Yeah, we
So
said return.
When we're fulfilling, it's UPS. Info Express otherwise.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. But if we weren't having an issue with Info Express, would you use it both ways?
Yeah.
Mhm. Which is what we did for
A long
a
time.
long time there. Yeah. Yeah. And we started using it for other schools in the state too for a while. So we have some schools that come to us. I mean, we have a large collection, so we were having a lot of buildup. So we just said, just send it. And then if we ever get it back, we'll be happy. So the returns were coming back from some of those smaller publics at a much slower rate, but we were fine with returns, but we really wanted to get the material to people.
I think there are a lot of institutions doing that.
Yeah.
You know, we were even, like, we don't have an agreement with any carriers, but we were mailing things from Mullins.
Mhm.
But then returns, we were sending Info Express knowing, you know, it'll get there eventually, and
Yeah.
those are usually less urgent.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't recalled or something like that, there's no one waiting.
Yes.
When the school requests something that, let's say, is an ALF, does it take an extended period of time to get that?
depends on when the request got in, because deliveries comes twice a day. So if it, oh, is it only once a day these days?
Well, they come multiple times, but not just for the archives and other stuff in the morning. The ILL stuff comes in the afternoon.
Oh,
So if you make the request before noon, it gets delivered to the library before 5, Monday through Saturday.
So just out of sheer curiosity, is there always someone at ALF, or is it just a completely empty
No, we have 5 staff at
Oh.
ALF. And like I said, if you request by noon, it's delivered by 5 by a person, and it's not an automated retrieval, it is a human retrieval. So it's high density storage, but someone still has to go up on the picker and find it and bring it back. And so we do that 6 days a week. And so for the ILL office, they get the requests in the morning and then send a request to ALF as soon as they get it, and then they'll bring it over in the afternoon. So it's usually still same day. Unless the request came in at like 1 in the afternoon or 2, then it'll be the next day. But usually it's the same day. And we used to have ALF staff scan articles at the ALF for ILL. But then we lost some staff and then the scanner broke, so then we stopped doing that. And so we just bring it, so they do retrieve everything and bring it over, and we deal with it, whether it's a scan or a loan. And so there's a lot of movement back and forth, but that at the moment it works best for us.
I like it.
Yeah.
Humorously kind of pictured it as like Fort Knox.
Yeah, we try to keep it locked down. There are not too many people that have access, but there are the 5 people who work there. And then there are some other people who do work with collections that are in the vault but are not accessioned. So we have some film collections. And then Lily has some things on lower shelves that they can just go in and retrieve. So it's still a limited number of people. I would say maybe 15 people have access to the vault. I am not one of them. They report to me, I don't have access. And so I have to have someone let me in if I ever need to go out. But
We
yeah,
don't tell the public where it is.
yeah, so. Yeah, so we do get quote, oh, can I just come out and browse? It says it's at the ALF. I'm like, no, you can't. You can come out and admire the majestic 30-foot, feet of books, but it is not a browsable collection. Yeah,
I will say the ALF staff are incredibly efficient.
yes.
They're unbelievable. They never make a mistake. They're incredibly efficient.
Yeah, we are very close to our 1 millionth retrieval from ALF, and we have never lost anything.
Wow.
So, yeah, it